Hello and welcome to the Mysticast, where you join Jack Stafford and Debra Littleboy, members of the Aetherius Society, the cosmic religion for the Aquarian age, as we break down the barriers between religion, science, metaphysics, all of which are really only aspects of the self-same quest for truth. Please note this is an independent program, not produced or fact-checked by the Aetherius Society. Today, our guest is Rizwan Virk. Hello, Rizwan.
Hello, nice to be with you today.
Nice to be with you. Today we're talking about when truth is stranger than science fiction. And this ties in well with your work. Could you kick us off by introducing yourself and telling us more about your work?
Sure. So, my background is I was a computer scientist, went to MIT many years ago. Then was an entrepreneur and investor in Silicon Valley, particularly in the video game industry. And I ran a startup accelerator at MIT for a while. And then I wrote a book called The Simulation Hypothesis, which is the idea that we actually might live inside a video game, and which, is known to most people through the popular media, such as The Matrix, for example, or various shows like Upload and many others that are out there today. And so currently I'm actually a professor at Arizona State University, and also working on a PhD there as well.
So a smart man. This will make us don't make us look too bad.
Well, it's interesting. You said that, the podcast cuts across, these different areas. And I just designed a class at ASU, which is the first college level class on this idea. And it's called Simulation Theory, Sci-Fi, Religion, Technology, and Philosophy. So it's about as interdisciplinary as you can get. And I found science fiction is a great way to touch, all of these topics and ways of thinking about the world. Yeah.
Yeah, it uses imagination, which the masters say is man's only creative faculty, and something that we all have to use. So most of our audience is members and sympathizers of the Aetherius Society, so we try and tackle things from that area, and it's packed full of the truth is much more advanced than science fiction, because really in essence science fiction I've always found is only 20 years ahead of, because you can't imagine people, you have to play to the audience's imagination. Science fiction from the past looks old-fashioned. When you heard about the when you heard about the Aetherius Society, what were your first impressions?
Well, just to follow up on your earlier point about science fiction in 20 years, there's actually a rule within sci-fi, which is you usually want it to take place far enough into the future that people today might think it's plausible, but not so far that they can't imagine it. And so they often end up going about 30 years into the future. So for example, 2001: A Space Odyssey came out in 1969, right? And Blade Runner, which came out in 1982, I think, or 84, so in the early 80s, was set around 2019 or so. So it was set about 30 years. So every 30 years we catch up with the science fiction of the past. So to answer your second question, I will admit I was not very familiar with the Aetherius Society, but I had heard some of these ideas in other contexts, because I spent a lot of time with people who have investigated UFOs and, potential extraterrestrial visitations. I've also spent time with folks who look at alternate histories. And, my own work is about the fact that there might actually be multiple alternate histories. There may be more than one as well. So I thought it would be interesting to just explore with you guys some of these topics.
Do your ideas also tie in the multiverse, the many frequencies of vibration that coexisting together in the same place?
Yeah, I mean, depending on how you define the multiverse. So my second book about simulation was called The Simulated Multiverse. And so it was about this idea of the quantum multiverse, and how, within quantum mechanics, one of the interpretations is that every time a decision is made, the universe actually breaks out into two separate versions of itself. And
I've heard about the many worlds theory, which is it's bullshit to me. But anyway,
some people don't like it. But what happens is with quantum mechanics, you get half of the physicists not liking the one theory, which is kind of the predominant theory, which is the Copenhagen interpretation. and the collapse of the probability wave. And then you have other half of the scientists who don't like that theory, but who like the multiverse theory or the many worlds interpretation.
Well,
And the problem is they both have problems, I think,
I had Steve Carroll on my other podcast, and he tried to convince me,
Wow.
but it didn't sound very, because, I mean, truth is strange fiction. And probably when you get to the higher level, they talk in the transmissions about the how many cloaks is it, Deborah, of the planet Earth? Is it
9?
49 cloaks, and then the sun has many more. So, and then they then you go on to learn the science of variable dimensions, and then so there's things that are way above our level of comprehension. But I can comprehend the idea that that with the scientists, this mainstream science, with stuck in this paper, the one level of everything. So the universe is completely. We've not discovered no inhabitable planets. We've looked out through our telescopes and we can't see any other life forms anywhere. But all the other planets are inhabited just at different frequencies, and because of the electromagnetic spectrum, we're at such a base. We're at our level of existence. Okay, that you don't see anything, but if you just change the vibration, it's packed.
Right. Well, that makes some sense. And, it's interesting that part of my work is comparative religions, even though I'm a technologist. And, I find, this idea, particularly within the Islamic tradition, like in the Quran, they talk about the 7 earths, right? And the 7 heavens and 7 hells as sort of parallel versions or sort of existing in different, like you can't get there physically. You have to like shift something in order to get there. And, they also talk about the jinn as being another set of entities that live on this physical planet with us, but they're kind of off at a different vibration, if you will. I mean, obviously they didn't use that word. I mean, all the spiritual texts have to use metaphors, right? And that's kind of one of my general points is that, the things that we hear in the spiritual text, they're always channeled in such a way, just like, Plato's, cave, the allegory of the cave, the philosopher left the cave and he came back and he tried to explain to people what he saw. I mean, you had to put it in terms that they can actually understand. And so pretty much any spiritual text we get is going to have metaphors. And, if some of those were done today, we might use different metaphors, rather than saying we put on the cloak, we put on the clothes of a body, a soul puts on the clothes of a body. Today, we might say you're a player who plays a video game and you put on a virtual reality helmet. And that when you put on that helmet, you forget what was happening before and you lose track of everything else that's going on and you believe this is reality. And that's still just a metaphor. I mean, that doesn't mean there's physically a virtual reality headset. And that's how I got involved in all this. Was I was actually I had sold my last startup and I was playing a virtual reality ping pong game. And I put on the VR helmet. And for a moment, I forgot that I was actually in the VR because the physics engine was so good. My body was fooled just for a moment. I mean, it was a big headset. There were wires. There was no way you could really forget. But for a moment, so much so that I tried to put the paddle on the table and I tried to lean against the table. And, of course, there was no table. It was all virtual. And the controller fell to the floor and I almost fell over. And then I started to think about, where our technology is going. And then I started to look back at what the quantum mechanics people were saying. And there's something fundamentally wrong with the universe with what they're saying. And they couldn't quite figure it out. And then I looked at what the religions were saying. And I said, well, there's a metaphor that kind of works with all of these that might help us to understand.
Yeah, that really works, doesn't it? Because also the other realms of existence in religion, the heaven and the hells, are right here, just a different frequency of vibration. Between incarnatory cycles, we go to another realm of existence. So it explains, ghosts and the hells in the same way that you believe in UFOs. The same way of thinking explains both viewpoints.
Yeah, and the interesting thing with UFOs is I spent some time with Jacques Vallée, who has been researching the subject since the 60s. It was part of Project Blue Book, and he says there are many sightings where one person sees the UFO and the person standing next to them doesn't see a UFO. And there's another instance. He said he was investigating this particular sighting, and they said the UFO came down at a 45-degree angle and it made some marks on the ground. So there was some physical, let's say residue of the UFO. So he went and he looked, and it was in a clearing in the redwoods up in northern, I think, California or southern Oregon. And he said, well, if it had come down at a 45-degree angle, it would have had to cut through the trees. I mean, there's like tall redwood trees. And they said, yeah, but we don't want to tell anybody that because we'll sound like we're crazy, right? And so there's this element of, perhaps these are things that are here, but they move in and out of our physical reality. And in video games, we do that all the time. And so if you ever play a video game, you will see that you can render like a dragon or an object. And as you're rendering it, you can move through other things. You can also make it so that, your player may be more advanced. Say you're at level 30, and my player is only at level 1. We'll be standing in what seems like the same physical field, but you'll see the dragon and I won't. Why? Because, because it gets rendered for us as necessary and based upon our perceptual level. Just like I'm not really talking to you right now, am I? I am talking to my computer and the bits are being sent over and you are rendering that on your computer. Who knows if you're seeing, who knows if this painting of, this kind of alien planet behind me is actually there.
That's
or
a tree. Riz, I see a tree.
You see a tree underneath the tree. Yeah.
Wow.
And so if reality gets rendered, then, again, that's also just a metaphor, but it's a way for us to understand that reality may be more complicated than with the way that we think it is. And so I like to use the multiplayer role-playing, massively multiplayer role-playing game just as the metaphor to help people open their minds that there might be something more going on than just the physical, material level of reality.
It reminds me of when my kids were little, so we're talking early 90s, and they were heavily into Pokemon. And I was to have to, they called me Pokemon. I didn't have a clue what I was doing, but it was like, no, Mum, you can't do that because my Cup-and-Hub's got you because he's got the magical powers of blah, blah, blah. And you can't cut through that because, and how many points, and it was all, and I was thinking, gracious me, this is like really clever stuff. Whoever thought of this game? Because it was making the kids think, like different levels for different.
Tell your story
abilities.
about the chipmunks, Deborah.
No.
Go on.
What, do you want to make me look stupid?
No, it's a good story.
I am? All right, okay, you forced my arm. When I was a kid, I was a very lonely kid, really like desperately lonely. And we're talking about a 2 or 3 year old child. And so lonely, I felt sick all the time that I was so lonely. I had people around me, but I was really, really lonely, desperately lonely. My mum read me a bedtime story every night, which is most parents do. And this one story was a Walt Disney story. It was Donald Duck and his 2 nephews, Chip and Dale, which were chipmunks. And my mum was reading this story and I could see the pictures and I was visualizing these, and they had such a good time. Riz, I cannot tell you, they were the best. And they were, everybody around was like really miserable, and they decided they were going to paint the houses with big squirrels and I was really into this story. And I thought, that's who I need. If I had Chip and Dale, I wouldn't be so lonely. And when I woke up the next morning, they were at the bottom of my bed. I'm telling you, they were at the bottom of my bed, and they were my invisible friends. According to my mum, they weren't invisible to me. No. They were real. And so they went everywhere with me, even to the extent that we're going to the shops one day, stood at the bus stop, bus comes along, we get on the bus. I look behind, we've left Chip and Dale at the bus stop. Scream. Mum, I'm a very proud woman. Chip and Dale, we've left them behind, Mum. No, they're here, dear. They're here, dear. No, they're not. They're at the bus stop. Scream. Stop the bus. Get off the bus. My mum's like really angry. Bus only comes like every 45 minutes. Had to go back, pick Chip and Dale up, wait for the next bus. My mum's super angry with me. Right, cut now. go to school, and Chippendale were no longer sort of important because I had school friends. 30 years of age, I'm laying on a Reiki bed with a friend, a Reiki practitioner, also a psychic, doing doing all the do. And she said to me, Deb, I shouldn't say this, but I've got these two characters racing round the bottom of this bed, like having such a good time. And as she said that, I connected with them and I knew exactly who they were. I said, oh, that's Chip and Dale. So I told the story. She said, well, they are thought forms and you're wasting so much energy letting that program run on. You best take them back in. So she told me how to take these two energy forms back into my solar plexus. But I had that running for 25 years in the background. So that proves how desperation, if you want, and imagination can actually create. And in the teachings, we know about thought forms and shades and all those things. But from a personal point, I know, hey, I had two little friends that I created for myself, and they were chipmunks. There we are. So that's the end of my career as a podcast.
Oh, that's a great story, right?
Debra. So so what you're creating, what I see is what you're creating for people is what I created for myself, but out of desperation. And now you're making it easier for everybody to become and create within this this wonderful world that is a computer program. I think that's just beautiful.
Yeah,
as long as you don't be killing people, don't be going killing people in your program. But no, that's not good karma.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the points that I try to make to people is don't assume that anyone else is an NPC. So NPC stands for non-player character. Who are the players inside video game, or the characters inside a video game that are not your character? So your character is usually called an avatar, right? A term which has been borrowed from the ancient Sanskrit, which meant when divinity comes into a body. And the guys at Lucasfilm, which is the company behind Star Wars, were creating one of the first online role-playing games back in the 1980s called Habitat, and they were looking for a terminology for this little character on the screen that was only like four bits or whatever, 8 bits. It was a really simple character. And they said, well, it feels like you're taking something that's big, your consciousness, and you're stuffing it down into these little phone lines. And you're going, and back then it was, modems over Commodore 64s. And you were sending it into this character. They said, well, why don't we call it an avatar? Because that's kind of what divinity does, in the Hindu terminology. And so I say always assume everybody else is also an avatar, meaning they also have a player behind their avatar. The nature of the game isn't, Grand Theft Auto, where you're trying to steal as many cars, and what people, and I'm not sure what you guys say on this front, but I spent a lot of time with folks who've had near-death experiences, and they, talk about the life review, where you have to review every single act that was done in your lifetime. And one of the guys, Daniel Brinkley, was a friend of mine who wrote Saved by the Light back in the 1990s. He talks about it as a holographic panoramic life review. And you're not just revisiting it, it's like you're playing it in this 3D projector space, but then you're also at the other person's location and you're feeling what the other people felt during the lifetime. And then you actually see things that even you didn't see, which is the ripple effects of your actions. And, he was in the military, and he shot people, and he was struck by lightning and was declared dead for how many ever minutes, kind of a full near-death experience. And he came back and he said he had to experience what it was like to be the people he shot and to see what effect it had on their lives. For me as a computer scientist, I say, okay, well, how would that work? The only way to do that would be as if everything was being recorded as is, and then you could replay it in a projection. And we've done that with video games, where you take like a 2D video game like League of Legends or World of Warcraft, and then we replay the game. You put on a virtual reality headset, and we put you inside the game at any coordinate inside, so you can literally see what it was like to shoot yourself, within that. And so I say, well, as we're looking for, what is the purpose of the game, we might talk to people who have peeked outside for whatever reason, right? Whether it's various religious traditions, scriptures, or near-death experiences, or others, and they tell us that the purpose of the game is not Grand Theft Auto, right? So, yeah.
I wonder, could that technology help people with trauma? Do you think, like as a therapy? Could it be, and has it been? Because it seems to me to be able to do that in almost like a safe zone, to see what's going on, to slow it down, to give you a chance to relive all those emotional triggers that come up. As long as you was in a safe zone with somebody that's going to help you through it, like we have a master that would take us through psychic experiences, or otherwise don't be doing that, Debra, not on your own, idiot. You need help. But I could really see benefits in that. Are there programs that help like that you know of?
Well, I know there are a number that have been trying to create these types of programs using virtual reality that would let you kind of revisit your fears. So, for example, there was a company that had done studies around people have fear of spiders or snakes, for example, and you could put on a virtual reality helmet and you could experience a snake or a spider, but you could do it in a safe environment. Or fear of heights, right, which is a big one. So if you've ever, I always tell the ping pong story, but another story from that same time, this was 2016 when consumer VR was relatively new, where I was up on a giant skyscraper. I put on the helmet and I didn't want to move to the right because I would fall off this giant skyscraper. So it is possible for, virtual images to induce some of the same types of feelings. And there are companies that have started to do that. None have been entirely, that successful as companies, but they have shown definite benefits in studies. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, can I come on to like a taboo subject now? And so I almost feel you're starting to cringe up here a little bit, but I want to take you back to Arthur C. Clarke and Childhood End. Now, I'm not familiar with that book. I just did a quick sort of look what was all that about. But what I did, and hook into was something which was really interesting in our teaching. So I would like to try and explore, even just on that sort of base level, if you could tell the storyline, and then I'll jump in best with what our teachings say, and then perhaps we can sort of dive in and just extrapolate out where it might be that Arthur C. was not as crazy as some people think he might have been. Right.
Yeah. Well, I've been a fan of his, of his work for a long time. And there's actually a TV show as well of Childhood Then that was on the Sci-Fi Channel for people that are kind of interested. But, the basic thing is that within Childhood Then, there's a peaceful alien invasion, if you will. So there's a group of aliens that arrives on Earth, and they're called the Overlords. And what happens is that they stay on their ships and they don't come down to the Earth, and they don't allow humans to see who they are, but they start giving instructions on technology, on social justice, on a bunch of different areas. And, they lead to kind of a utopian age, within the science fiction novel on Earth, but without ever actually having seen them. And then eventually they come down after like a generation or two, and you find out the reason why that they haven't come down is because they look kind of like our traditional, at least within the Judeo-Christian traditions. There's kind of a traditional depiction of the devil or demons with horns and tails, and that's how they actually look. And they knew if they came down right away, the mythology that has spread within humans would be such that they would have reacted in a bad way. But because they had been around for so long, in their spaceships, by the time they did come down, it was a more harmonious thing, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I read the book, but that was one of the main storylines of Childhood's End.
And was there a case where then the humans didn't then reproduce in the normal way?
So, well, yeah, I think at the end, then once they reached a certain point, and I'm trying to remember the specific scene here, but at the very end, people evolve, and they are able to, they basically get into a psychic group consciousness in a way. And they no longer like reproduced in the same way. It no longer became a society of individuals. And so they had like clairvoyance and telekinetic powers, but they also had like a group consciousness. And then eventually they went off, something happens with the moon, and eventually they left Earth, the children that were left, So that's, I mean, it's been a while since I've read it, but there was an element of that at the very end of what happened, which showed that humanity was evolving from these physical kind of individual beings that are separate from each other into this kind of giant, more broad collective consciousness.
Hell of a story, yeah.
And that last bit was the bit that I had picked. As I told you, I did a bit of like I think they call it a screen scrape or something, but just a quick bit. And what I took from that is that childhood end means that there was no longer the need to become a baby, reincarnate baby through childhood to adult, because when we're told in our teachings, when we ascend, so when we've learned all the lessons we need to in this classroom, and we die, which we know we don't actually die, but we move on. So we've learned all the lessons. We're in ascension. We can either choose then to come back down and help the rest of the poor souls carry on, as part of a certain hierarchy of Earth, or you go to a different planet to start their life cycle. If you go to a different planet, let's say Mars, it doesn't really, but let's just say Mars, you go to Mars, you don't start off as a baby. You come in with your full consciousness. You're given a mum and a dad, for want of a better word, but they're like guardians. And so you're in an adult form, whatever that would be. Martian form, we're told, is like humanoid. So let's just say, so you're in but you haven't forgotten any of the lessons that you've learned. You almost like stashed them, right? You banked all them. They're all yours. You can't lose them anymore. And so there are no babies, there are no children, because you're then born through the logos, the flame of that planet. And that was the bit that I was taken from. I thought, I wonder whether Arthur has seen the fact that this reincarnation cycle that we're all in, where the baby comes in, the baby can't remember its last lives mostly, because the consciousness is all like crammed and wrapped up and in knots, until we can, and that seemed to me like, whoa, if that's what he saw, if that's what he managed to bring through, because I believe that you bring all this information through, then that's a lot more than your 30 years you gave me on like the sci-fi into the future. Or have I got the dates wrong on that? It's got to be, what, 50 years plus on that story. So
that story though, that one went a long way into the future. Like by the end, I think it's quite a bit in the future. Well, obviously Clarke, I was just going to say, he spent much of the later part of his life in Sri Lanka, which is a Buddhist country, and I was there a few years ago, and we were able to visit his office, which is still preserved there. So he's got all of his books are there where he worked. But, I don't know that he himself was either a believer in reincarnation or not. I get the sense that he was relatively skeptical, but he was certainly within this Buddhist environment where,
good material.
That's a pretty, yeah, it's a part of the culture, this idea that you come back, and you have your karma. And so, I built a little bit on that in my in my simulation theory books, where I talk about karma is really a database of lessons that you have to learn in the future, and you keep adding to this database. If you think of it like your personal tutorial plan, right? Using the metaphor of the classroom that you're using here, and that when you come back, you still have this long list of lessons that you have to learn, but at least within many of the traditions of the East, and even within the Greek traditions, you cross the river of forgetfulness, right? You cross Lethe, or in the Chinese traditions, you drink the tea of forgetfulness. So you forget about all that, but then more advanced souls are able to remember it, while they're here. And there are many stories within the yogic traditions of people who can basically come back in, materialize a human body, an adult body, if you will, and just come right back in, even though they've died. My latest book is called Wisdom of a Yogi, and it's about Yogananda. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with his book.
That's how we found you.
Yeah. And so, which is a kind of a spiritual classic in the West. Yogananda came over about 100 years ago, and he was the first Indian guru to really make an impact, who lived, in America, lived in Los Angeles and San Diego. And, his stories of his tradition include a mysterious guy named Babaji, which just means, revered father, if you do a literal translation of it. But of a guy in the Himalayas who's many hundreds of years old and who keeps reappearing in the same body, like I'm a 25-year-old, of a 25-year-old man. And so he's either to either preserve that body, or in some of those traditions, he's able to recreate that body and come right back in whenever he needs to. And there are stories of him going back, hundreds, even thousands of years in some cases. And so, within the yogic traditions, there's a lot of those stories. Again, if you use the metaphor of the video game, it becomes relatively easy to understand, because when you create an avatar, you create a character, normally you would just create an adult character, and then you would start playing that character, right? And so, my definition of ensoulment in that case, I was just in the UK, actually. I was in Birmingham this summer, and I gave a talk at a Islamic conference about Islamic jurisprudence, which is kind of a strange place for me to be talking. But there was debates about ensoulment. When does the soul enter the body? And there's an Ayatollah from Iran there. There were all kinds of scientists, scholars from Cairo University, etc. And I said, well, here's my definition of ensoulment. It's when you put on the virtual reality headset and you forget what was going on before. But then, I also like to talk about the Tibetan dream yoga traditions, where you learn to wake up inside a dream. So it's a lucid dream. And once you wake up inside the dream, then you can remember there was a part of you that's asleep in the bed, and there's a whole nother life before that you normally don't remember because of that veil. And then they try to use that idea to say, if you can do that here, while you're awake, you can basically remember what was going on before. And so within the Tibetan traditions, there's also this idea of these kind of dream yoga as one of the 6 yogas of Naropa, who was a Kashmiri Pandit who taught one of the key Tibetan lamas who walked over the mountains, back then the Himalayas. And there's a secret 7th yoga called forceful projection. And the idea was they would leave their body through third eye, and they could go into another biological entity that was there. And so, at least it touches on this idea that you can enter an adult body. And there's a famous story of Marpa, who was the translator who went across the mountains. His son was on a horse, and he fell off the horse. And as he was falling, he knew the secret yoga, and he projected his consciousness out of his physical body into a pigeon that was flying, because his body was about to break its neck. The pigeon went to India, where he found a recently deceased, body of a young man that was in relatively good condition. He entered that, and he basically entered it as an adult and started teaching as the Pigeon Saint, they called him. And then years later, when someone asked Milarepa, who's Tibet's most famous yogi, how do you do this? He said, go to India and find this guy, the Pigeon Saint. He's the expert, because he did it. And he's now in this other adult body. And so there is this interesting, yogic practice. I mean, I can't say I know the details, but I've read enough about it to know that there are enough people in those traditions who believe in those practices, and some who say they've seen that actually happen. So,
well, that's
and
true.
what you're doing, Chris, sorry, Jack, go.
Well, just that lives up to the billing, though.
Truth is stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wouldn't get,
Yeah.
you don't get that in, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I don't talk about that too much with my colleagues at places like MIT or SU. Or
But, but if it happens if it's been told in that tradition and it's told in that, like walking on the water or ascending, if it reappears in different teachings, that for me is a big tick in the possibility box. So.
Yeah, that's part of my research for Wisdom of a Yogi was that book has all kinds of stories of levitating saints who are bilocating, is in one location and somebody sees them in the other location. And so I interviewed a professor of religion named Diana Pasulka from University of North Carolina. She wrote a book called American Cosmic, called UFOs, Technology, Religion, but she's really a scholar of Catholicism. And she says that what happens in academia, like she believed these stories when she was younger. She read Autobiography of a Yogi and she was a Catholic, and there's plenty of Catholic stories of saints like Saint Teresa of Avila, who was floated many times up and people were trying to hold her down, or Saint Joseph of Cupertino. And she went to the Vatican and she was given access to their canonization records of Joseph of Cupertino. And she said she saw, literally there were thousands of people that saw this guy float in the square, outside in Cupertino. And that's when she realized, okay, well, academia tells us, kind of indoctrinates us to treat these as just as funny stories, looking at it from a sociological perspective, that it doesn't have a reality, but perhaps these things are really happening. And so it kind of opened her mind that maybe reality is not what we think it is. And so
that's what happened to me when I came into the Ethereal Society. I was very, skeptical in that, but if you just say that if everything is true, all these allegories, if you just open, you relax and say, okay, well, if they've told me this and that turned out to be true, and the people who told me this told me also that, if you extrapolate it and it's all true, then it opens your mind and frees you a lot. Yeah.
Yeah,
but
if you can find the commonalities.
Discerning, because there's still you need to be discerning, because there are worms in the can. And for me, who searched for truth for many years, well, since the chipmunks, really. So I've been, I've been on this for a long time. And when I found the teachings, I'd spent thousands of pounds that I didn't have to spend, and I've been down cul-de-sacs that were long and hard and dark, and come back again with shame on my face, and my friends going, "I told you that was a load of rubbish," and all. So I've gone through all of that just to find the truth. The truth has to be here somewhere. But for me, and I can only speak for me, when I found the teachings, I was very cautious. Like, I didn't want to sign any documents. But the more I studied and the more I learned for myself, and actually they said that, and it's true because I've proven it for myself, and they've said that, and this happened, then I bring that, and it builds that confidence to a stage where I could sign the paper and become a member, and then do the training and become a temple initiate. But you can't take everything just because it sounds like a good story.
Well, you have to have experience. It's all taught you. You saw all these other societies and you saw what was wrong. And then there's a good scene in The Life of Brian. You remember the Monty Python movie? I think John Cleese says, "You are the Messiah. I say you are, and I should know. I followed a few." He's been following all these different gurus, and he's been laughed at, and but he's got the ability through all that training to discern, and it's his higher self. He knew, like, I think Dr. King, he met some people who were looking for a Messiah. I think all that time, and they knew one day they would meet the Messiah. So of course you follow quite a few wrong messiahs, but you learn what like.
Yeah, you know whether it smells right after a while. You can, you get, your nose gets tuned in. So for me, the teachings are good as long as I stick with what the masters have said, what Dr. King says, not what my colleague, that fellow Ethereal Society friend from another.
You get a lot of weirdos
society
in
friend. So you don't want to, you listen to that politely, but then go back to the transmissions. And that for me is my truth. So Lord Babaji for me, because I've been told by the people that I believe, is the Lord of the earth. He's in charge of the hierarchy of earth. And he's been here for, you tell me, Jack, 300,000 years. I'm just going to be here for another 300,000 years. Or have I got that wrong? Is it millions? I'm not very good with noughts. There might be a few more noughts on that, but there's definitely some threes in the number. For a long, long time. And he's the boss. And he knows a lot. Very clever man.
in Shambhala. Yeah.
No, that's Lord Buddha. Is in Shambhala.
The Senatama. Sorry.
Yeah. Lord Buddha's in charge of Shambhala now, according to the teachings. I love all this, and I really love the fact that with all your training and all your all those little letters that you'll have after your name, Riz, you're talking to me, and we're able to share space because you're inspiring, and I'm loving the fact that you're giving people that opportunity to explore their creativity within this safe zone. But don't go letting people kill each other. No. That's not good. That's not good.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's where I think, part of the reason why I got into the work that I do, obviously there's a background in the video game industry and all of that, but it's also because I spent so much time with people from different traditions. I grew up in the Islamic traditions. I've spent a lot of time with people in the Buddhist and the Hindu traditions. And obviously I grew up in the Midwest in the US. So I've spent a lot of time with people from the Christian traditions as well. But stepping away from that, I've spent a lot of time with scientists in academia and technologists in Silicon Valley, as well as people within the UFO community, as well as people who do shamanic dream work. And I find that, the one way that I can, be in all these spaces together is to use the right metaphors, right? And because metaphors give us a way to do that. Even within academia, that they aren't necessarily willing to entertain the idea even that, there are aliens, or supernatural beings about, that, might be in charge of the earth, or that might live in a place called Shambhala and you can't see it, right? But they are willing, once you start talking to them about the idea that, well, what if this is all a rendered simulation? And then they start to say, oh, well, anybody who's like not in it might look to us like a supernatural being. And so then you start to open up, this idea from a pure materialistic atheism to, oh, there's actually other possibilities here. Just because we can't see them doesn't mean that they might not actually be quote unquote real. And so that's part of the reason why I do the work that I do. It's because,
Very valuable.
Bridge building. You're bridge building.
Gateway drug. Yeah. And I think the masters do say that they say that it is a simulation, but it is one step removed. So, you're shooting a virtual player. You're not. If I die, I'm not dead. In this,
right?
I have 7 bodies. My other bodies will go into the astral plane. And then I have an etheric body, and I have a soul, but I really am spirit. So, yeah, it is a game. It is this. None of this is real. So, but it is a reflection. It is real. So we should be nice to the other people and not shoot them, even on the physical plane. Yeah.
Right, and that's where I like to look for the commonalities to say, okay, maybe these guys got it wrong, but if they're saying some of the same things that these guys are saying, perhaps that little bit is right. And I talked about the life review being, in a sense, showing you what the purpose of life is, because it's like you're going to review, like the coach after the end of a football game goes back and you watch the video and you review it, and that kind of tells you what were the rules of the game. But then, within the Islamic traditions, they also have this idea of the scroll of deeds. And the scroll of deeds, they have these 2 angels. They even have names for them, the Kiram and Kitaban. One writes down all your good deeds, one writes down all your bad deeds. And it's kind of the source of these metaphors that we use, like in kids' movies, like Disney movies, where you have the good angel on your left shoulder and the bad angel, or the devil telling you to do all these bad things, which comes from an angel and a jinn in the Islamic traditions. But the point is that these are really just metaphors, right? They don't mean there's an angel with a feather pen trying to write down, oh, and you went to the store today and did not treat the clerk nice, right? What are they going to write in Arabic? They're going to write in Chinese. What it really means. So they're both trying to tell us the same thing, which is that somehow all of this is being recorded, and that we will have to review it. And that's what, but it was written, 1,600 years ago or 1,400 years ago. And so you had to like deal with language that people could understand at the time, just like today's language. And so when Yogananda came over 100 years ago, he chose the story about World War I. You talked about the suffering and the killing. And he, back then they saw newsreels. So they saw black and white, images at the theater. And he was really sad to see the suffering. I mean, World War I wasn't called World War I. It was called the Great War because there was so much mechanized killing. It was the first time they were really using, machine guns and artillery. And then he saw a vision where he actually saw like in 3D, the killing and the suffering. And he said, Lord, why do you allow this? And the answer that he got back was using a metaphor of the time, the latest technology metaphor. And the answer was, well, it's like a movie projector, right? And you're all playing characters. And so even though the characters are suffering, the actors don't die. And so you don't die. And so that was the metaphor he used to use with his students, was look away from the movie screen. And if you've ever done that when you're in a movie theater, you look around and you can see the flickering of the lights, but you can also see everybody so engrossed that they're like forgetting that there's anything else. And I believe if he were alive today, he would use an updated metaphor, right, to describe it, which is it's like a movie, it's like a play, which is what Shakespeare said, that all the world's a stage. In the Vedas, there's the Leela, which is the game, and then Buddhist doctrine, there's the dream. But it's interactive. You can change the script. You have a script. You're supposed to do certain things, but you can change the script. And we're in the audience, but we're also playing roles. What does that sound like? It sounds like a massively multiplayer role-playing game using today's terminology, which is also just a metaphor. Yeah.
And so you wrote about this in your book, The Simulation Hypothesis, which people can get.
Yeah, so that was the main book that talks about all these subjects, and then Wisdom of a Yogi is like the more recent book that is more specifically about Yogananda and yogic teachings and bringing them back. But the simulation hypothesis has, a bunch of this stuff. It's technology, the physics, and the religious traditions and the mystical traditions, and why they're all telling us something similar, in my opinion.
You have a pyramid on your Twitter page and a pyramid behind you. Are you also
into shape power?
Shape
well, so not specifically, but this is my favorite artist named Ellen McDonough, and she tends to make these beautiful images of pyramids. And you could say she's obsessed with pyramids, both on Earth as well as in other landscapes. So I like it just because of the science fiction quality of the painting. Yeah.
Well, we can keep chatting all day, but I think we run out of time, and it's been super interesting. And so where people can learn more about you, follow you?
Yeah, so they can go to my website, which is zenentrepreneur.com, which is based on the title of my first book, which was called Zen Entrepreneurship. And they can follow me on Twitter or X at Riz Stanford, just like the university, or on Instagram at Riz Cambridge, like the university in the UK or the town in Massachusetts where I happened to be living at the time when I created that account.
That's wonderful. Well, I really appreciate the work you're doing, taking the ancient knowledge and translating it for the modern audience. It's wonderful work.
Good work. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's been really fun talking with you guys.
Thank you. And if people want to learn more about the Aetherius Society, they can go to aetherius.org. Thank you.